My daughter-in-law sent me 13 words that changed my life forever. This Christmas is immediate family only. Please do not come. After years of paying their bills, raising their children, and making myself invisible to keep peace, I finally realized I was never truly family to them at all. Before we jump in, let us know where you're watching from. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Now, get comfortable and let's dive in. My name is Evelyn Harper, and by the age of 68, I had become very skilled at making myself small. After my husband died from heart disease 6 years earlier, silence settled over my life in ways I never expected. Some silences felt unbearable. Others felt safer than disappointment. By the time I bought the hidden lakefront estate in Vermont, after selling my luxury craft store company in Charleston, South Carolina, I no longer wanted noise, obligations, or the exhausting performance my family had slowly become. The house was the only thing I kept entirely for myself. Nathan, my only son, believed I simply traveled often after retirement. Brianna probably assumed I spent my days quietly decorating some condominium in Charleston while waiting for invitations to babysit. Neither of them knew about the estate surrounded by pine trees and frozen water. I never told them because I wanted one place untouched by expectations, guilt, or carefully managed family appearances. For years, I paid school tuition deposits for my grandchildren, covered emergencies without being asked twice, and hosted holidays where I somehow ended up carrying dishes while Brianna entertained guests beside glowing cameras and expensive flower arrangements. She built an online image around family warmth while slowly making me invisible inside my own family. Sometimes photographs appeared online with everyone smiling together except me. Other times, I sat silently at the edge of conversations while Brianna redirected attention toward people she considered more impressive. Nathan always avoided conflict. He preferred keeping peace over confronting uncomfortable truths, and I allowed it because part of me feared losing him completely after already losing my husband. That winter evening, I sat alone beside the fireplace wrapped in a thick blanket listening to the quiet crackle of burning wood. The silence inside the house felt strangely comforting compared to the hollow tension I carried for years around my family. Without fully understanding why, I sensed something inside me beginning to change. A few nights before Christmas, I stood alone in my kitchen, rolling cinnamon cookie dough across the marble counter while soft jazz played somewhere in the background. The house smelled warm and familiar, but beneath the quiet comfort sat an ache I had spent years trying not to examine too closely. Outside the tall windows, snow drifted steadily across the frozen lake while darkness settled heavily over the mountains. Then my phone vibrated beside the mixing bowl. I glanced down casually at first, expecting another grocery delivery notification or weather alert. Instead, I saw Brianna's name glowing across the screen beside 13 words that instantly hollowed something out inside me. This Christmas is immediate family only. Hope you understand. Please do not come. For several seconds, I simply stared at the message while flour clung to my fingertips. The kitchen suddenly felt colder despite the fire burning in the next room. Deep down, I knew Nathan had not written those words himself. He avoided emotionally difficult conversations, the same way some people avoid storms by pretending the clouds are not gathering overhead. I slowly placed the phone face down on the counter and walked toward the lakefront windows. As I watched snow cover the dark shoreline, painful memories surfaced one after another with brutal clarity. Vacations. I discovered only through photographs online. Holiday dinners where I arrived early to cook and clean before disappearing quietly into the background once guests arrived. Conversations interrupted whenever someone more socially useful entered the room. For years, I convinced myself endurance meant love. Now I finally understood how much of myself I sacrificed simply to remain connected to my son. Without crying or calling anyone, I opened the kitchen drawer and removed an old leather notebook. One by one, I wrote down the names of every relative Brianna quietly pushed aside over the years. Halfway through the list, my shaking hands became perfectly steady. Then I made the first invitation call. The confused voice answering said Brianna already told everyone I wanted to spend Christmas alone this year. I spent most of that snowy night moving between the kitchen and my study making phone calls while the storm deepened outside. With every conversation, the warmth inside the house seemed to grow, while the truth about my family became colder and sharper. Nearly everyone sounded confused at first. Brianna had already prepared explanations for my absence long before sending me that message. Apparently, I needed privacy this Christmas. Apparently, I was exhausted and wanted to rest quietly alone. Apparently, Nathan's holiday gathering would be small and intimate. After enough calls, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The people excluded were always the same kinds of relatives: older family members, divorced cousins, struggling nephews, anyone who complicated Brianna's polished image of perfection. Still, I refused to complain about her during those conversations. Instead, I focused on what mattered: warm meals, extra bedrooms, children running freely through the house, space where nobody needed to impress anyone else. By midnight, my dining table had transformed into organized lists and handwritten notes, catering schedules, guest rooms, grocery deliveries, transportation from nearby airports. As I worked, I slowly remembered a version of myself I had almost forgotten. Before grief and family tension consumed my life, I had built a successful company from nothing. Creating welcoming spaces once came naturally to me. Somewhere along the way, I stopped believing I could still do it. Near sunrise, Nathan finally texted me. "We will celebrate together another time. Love you, Mom." I stared at the screen for several moments. The message sounded polite, careful, and strangely hollow. Once, a few words like that would have been enough to keep me emotionally attached for weeks. Not anymore. I answered simply, "Do not worry about me. I already have lovely plans." The following afternoon, florists arrived with pine garlands, while grocery deliveries filled the kitchen pantry. As I reviewed catering expenses online later that evening, another set of numbers caught my attention: Nathan's luxury vehicle lease, private school deposits, club membership fees. My finger hovered silently above the cancellation option. The next morning, pale winter lights stretched across the frozen lake while I sat alone at the kitchen table reviewing years of expenses connected to Nathan's household. The numbers filled my laptop screen in neat rows that somehow looked colder than the snow outside. Luxury vehicle lease payments, private school deposits, emergency flights, holiday shopping, country club fees Brianna proudly displayed online beside photographs of expensive cocktails and carefully filtered sunsets. None of it had been treated like kindness for a very long time. Somewhere along the way, my support became an expectation instead of generosity. I quietly financed stability while Brianna performed wealth for strangers online. Looking at those payments now, I finally admitted something painful to myself. I continued giving because being useful felt safer than risking emotional distance from my son. Without anger, I canceled the luxury vehicle payment. The relief arrived immediately. That afternoon, the Vermont estate slowly transformed into the kind of Christmas gathering I once believed families naturally created for each other. Florists hung fresh pine garlands along the staircase, while the fireplaces were cleaned and prepared for guests. I arranged blankets at the ends of beds, stocked the pantry with food, and listened to the house grow warmer with every small preparation. 2 days later, I drove briefly to my Charleston apartment to collect winter clothes and old family albums. The apartment felt emotionally stale the moment I stepped inside, like a version of my life I had already outgrown. On the hallway table rested a dealership envelope addressed to Nathan regarding the missed vehicle payment. I left it exactly where it was. A short time later, keys rattled at the front door. Nathan stepped inside while Brianna waited impatiently in the hallway outside. The moment he noticed the envelope, his face tightened. "Mom, what happened?" "I stopped paying for the vehicle," I answered calmly. Before he could respond further, Brianna called sharply from outside. Instinctively, Nathan turned toward her voice and left the conversation unfinished. As I locked the apartment behind me later that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. By Christmas Eve afternoon, the Vermont estate glowed with warmth against the heavy snow surrounding the property. Fireplaces burned steadily throughout the house, while candles flickered softly beside evergreen garlands draped along the staircase. The long dining table stretched across the center of the room beneath golden lights, already crowded with desserts, wine glasses, and wrapped gifts waiting beneath the towering Christmas tree. For the first time in years, I felt nervous in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Then the guests began arriving. Children burst through the front door dragging snow across the wooden floors, while older relatives followed behind carrying coats, laughter, and surprised expressions. Aunt Louise wrapped both arms around me the moment she stepped inside, her eyes immediately filling with tears. My nephew Daniel, who spent years quietly avoiding family gatherings after his divorce, stood near the fireplace smiling more genuinely than I had seen in a very long time. The entire house slowly transformed into something I barely recognized anymore. A real family gathering. Nobody competed for attention. Nobody staged photographs beside expensive decorations or filtered cocktails. Conversations flowed naturally between generations, while cousins shared old memories near the fire, and children chased each other through the hallways laughing loudly enough to shake the quiet loneliness out of the house itself. At one point during dinner, Sarah leaned toward me while everyone talked around us. "This feels like the happiest Christmas we have had in years," she whispered. Her words settled heavily inside my chest because I realized how long I accepted emotional crumbs while calling it love. Later that evening, Sarah's teenage daughter uploaded several group photographs from the estate into the extended family chat online. I noticed immediately, but said nothing. Within minutes, my phone began vibrating repeatedly inside my pocket. Missed calls from Nathan. Angry messages from Brianna. Finally, a FaceTime request appeared across the screen. I stepped quietly into the kitchen before answering. The moment the call connected, Brianna's furious face filled the screen. Brianna's face appeared on the screen immediately, tense with anger and disbelief. Nathan stood beside her, looking exhausted, his expression caught somewhere between embarrassment and confusion. Behind them, their living room looked polished almost to the point of feeling artificial. Decorative lights framed the walls perfectly, while branded gift boxes sat arranged beside the tree. Even through the screen, the entire evening felt staged. Meanwhile, warm candlelight flickered softly behind me in the Vermont kitchen. "What exactly is going on there?" Brianna demanded without greeting me. "Why is everyone at your house?" Her voice trembled beneath the anger, and I realized something important almost instantly. This was not truly about hurt feelings or family division. Brianna was terrified of losing control over the image she spent years carefully building. Nathan stared silently past me, toward the glowing rooms behind my shoulders. "You own this place?" he finally asked. I answered calmly. Nobody ever asked how I lived after retirement or what became of my life after selling the company. Brianna cared about appearances, and I wanted one place untouched by performance and manipulation. As Brianna continued accusing me of embarrassing them publicly, my attention drifted briefly toward the background behind her. Ring lights glowed beside the dining room, while catering staff crossed quietly behind the camera, carrying trays of food. In that moment, everything became painfully clear. Their Christmas gathering was not a holiday celebration at all. It was sponsored content. Nathan slowly turned toward the equipment behind him, and shame passed visibly across his face. Brianna claimed I was dividing the family and upsetting the children, but her words no longer carried power over me. Quietly, I explained that I was tired of only being valuable when someone needed money, childcare, or emotional labor. Instead of begging for space at their table, I built a better one. Nathan asked softly if they could come to Vermont tomorrow. I refused gently. After ending the call, I returned to the dining room, where laughter still filled the house, while snow drifted peacefully outside. Several weeks passed after Christmas beneath heavy Vermont snow, and a silence that no longer felt painful. Most mornings I sat beside the frozen lake with tea warming my hands, while pale sunlight stretched across the ice. I reorganized the craft room upstairs, baked bread when the house felt too quiet, and slowly settled into routines that belonged entirely to me. For the first time in years, I stopped waiting for Nathan to call. Meanwhile, consequences unfolded naturally without my involvement. Family members quietly began discussing old holidays online and sharing memories of being excluded from gatherings Brianna carefully controlled. The image she spent years building around family warmth started cracking piece by piece. Sponsorships quietly disappeared from her accounts, and several polished brand partnerships vanished altogether. I never celebrated any of it. Truth simply stopped hiding. Nathan eventually sold the luxury vehicle, and the extravagant lifestyle surrounding their marriage noticeably shrank. During occasional phone calls, I could hear tension sitting heavily beneath his voice. A few times, he visited my Charleston apartment alone, carrying flowers, groceries, or offering to repair small things around the house. Without Brianna directing conversations, Nathan seemed strangely uncertain, almost younger somehow. One snowy afternoon, curiosity led me to revisit Brianna's older social media posts. I found smiling photographs beside captions describing me as her second mother, and carefully staged videos suggesting she constantly cared for me. Looking at them now, I felt no anger, only disappointment and clarity. This time, I saved screenshots instead of ignoring them. Late in January, Nathan visited Vermont alone for the first time since Christmas. He stood quietly near the fireplace, taking in the calm warmth of the estate, the handmade blankets, and the absence of cameras or performance. Something about the silence seemed to affect him deeply. That evening, after he left, I sat at my desk reviewing estate papers and slowly opened a folder labeled Harper Family Trust Revision. By late February, winter had started loosening its grip on Vermont. Snow melted slowly into silver streams along the edges of the property, while gray clouds drifted low across the mountains. Nathan arrived alone again that weekend, looking more tired than I had ever seen him. The polished confidence he once carried so carefully had faded beneath exhaustion and quiet uncertainty. Without much discussion, he spent most of the afternoon helping me repair an old wooden fence near the lake. Later, he carried firewood into the house and tightened the loose gate beside the driveway. Watching him work silently with his hands reminded me painfully of his father. For years, Nathan buried himself beneath expensive routines and emotional avoidance. Now, simple physical labor seemed to ground him in ways success never had. That evening, I spread old financial folders across the dining table. Tuition deposits, emergency loans, vacation debt, mortgage assistance, credit card balances. I quietly covered after Brianna's sponsored events and carefully staged celebrations. Nathan stared at the paperwork while the fire crackled softly beside us. The realization moved slowly across his face, carrying shame deeper than any argument ever could. I explained calmly that after losing my husband, I became terrified of losing my son too. Somewhere along the way, love became tangled with enabling. I kept rescuing him because usefulness felt safer than boundaries. For the first time in years, Nathan admitted he allowed Brianna to control family dynamics because conflict frightened him. Then I showed him the revised Harper Family Trust documents. Most of my estate would now fund scholarships and business grants for older women rebuilding their lives after widowhood or divorce. Nathan looked stunned, but I could also see understanding beginning to form beneath the shock. My future no longer revolved around protecting his comfort. At sunset, we stacked firewood together outside while his phone vibrated repeatedly inside his coat pocket. For the first time, he ignored every call. By early spring, the frozen lake outside my Vermont estate had finally begun to thaw. Sunlight stretched longer across the water each evening, while the cold wind slowly softened into warmer air. My life settled into peaceful routines that no longer revolved around sacrifice or emotional exhaustion. Most mornings, I drank tea on the deck wrapped in a blanket while planning garden beds and organizing supplies for the workshops I recently started hosting. Every Saturday, older women gathered around the long farmhouse tables inside my studio. Some were widows, rebuilding their lives after years of grief. Others arrived carrying quiet heartbreak from divorces or loneliness that settled heavily with age. Together, we painted, sewed, laughed, and slowly rediscovered pieces of ourselves many of us had abandoned long ago. One afternoon, a woman gently squeezed my hand before leaving class. "Thank you for making people feel visible again." Her words stayed with me long after everyone drove home. Nathan began visiting more consistently that spring. Sometimes he repaired loose boards near the porch or carried supplies into the workshop without being asked. The relationship between us felt different now, quieter and healthier somehow. He no longer arrived expecting financial rescue or emotional protection. For the first time in years, he treated me like an independent woman instead of a permanent safety net. Meanwhile, Brianna's carefully polished online world continued fading quietly into the background. Sponsorships disappeared and public interest shifted elsewhere. Surprisingly, I felt no satisfaction watching it happen. Revenge no longer interested me. Peace mattered far more. One evening, Nathan attended a workshop and quietly watched women laughing together around the tables. Before leaving, he thanked me softly for not giving up on him completely. Later that night, sunlight shimmered across the thawing lake while my phone lit up with an invitation to family dinner. This time, I felt no fear at all. By late spring, Vermont felt entirely transformed. Warm sunlight poured through the open windows of my lake house, while trees surrounding the water bloomed deep green again. Sometimes I still thought about the woman I had been only months earlier, anxiously waiting for invitations and quietly measuring her worth through how useful she remained to other people. That woman no longer existed. When Nathan invited me to dinner one Friday evening, I accepted calmly without overthinking every word in the message. The desperation I once carried had disappeared somewhere between the snowstorms and the silence that followed Christmas. Dinner at their home felt different immediately. No ring light stood near the dining table. No cameras waited beside carefully arranged decorations. Nathan cooked the meal himself while the children laughed naturally through the house without posing for photographs or being corrected constantly. Even Brianna seemed quieter now. She remained polite throughout the evening, though a cautious distance still existed between us. Some wounds heal slowly, and others simply teach people where boundaries belong. Strangely, The imperfections of the evening made everything feel more genuine than any polished holiday from the past. At one point, my granddaughter climbed into my lap while telling me about school, completely unaware of how deeply that small moment healed something inside me. As the evening ended, I realized I no longer feared losing access to my family because my identity no longer depended on their approval. Real dignity begins when people stop begging to be chosen. Later that night, I returned to Vermont and carried a cup of tea onto the deck overlooking the quiet lake. The silence surrounding me no longer felt lonely. It felt free. For the first time in my life, I was no longer waiting for a seat at someone else's table. I had finally become the hostess of my own life. Sometimes life becomes peaceful only after people stop begging for love, where respect no longer exists. True healing begins when the silence no longer feels like rejection, but freedom. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are self-respect finally finding its voice. Some relationships survive only after truth replaces performance and dignity replaces sacrifice. Thank you for spending time with this story. Please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to subscribe and follow the channel for more emotional stories like this.